All right, hello everybody. Welcome to the weekly SIG Docs meeting. I'm Jim Angel, one of your co-hosts, and let's kick off our agenda. So before getting started, is there any new contributors joining us today?
I guess you can. This is my first time attending SIG Docs. So I'm Joseph Sandoval. I was the comms lead for 120. So grateful to be here.
Awesome, welcome.
Hey, my name is Rolf. I don't think I've met all of you. I'm a tech writer at Red Hat and very interested in what you guys are working on.
Hi, my name is Abu Bakr from GitLab. I've interacted with the SIG at KubeCon Barcelona before, but I've never been active in the meetings and so on. Glad to be here.
Awesome. And you said you're from GitLab?
Yes.
Perfect. Cool. Well, welcome everybody, whether you're sitting in for our retro discussion that we'll talk about in a few minutes here, or if you're here for the long haul and want to get involved with SIG Docs, we're glad to have you and happy to answer any questions. So if this is anyone's first meeting here, these are relatively informal. We have an agenda that we follow just to make sure we can have a structured discussion. But if there's any questions, comments, don't hesitate to interrupt, ask questions. You know, we all had to start somewhere when it came to this kind of thing called docs. And, you know, I think it's a confusing journey if you go through it blindly, and you got a lot of friendly folks here happy to help. Cool. So moving on to the updates and reminders. This week's PR Wrangler is Vineeth, and next week we do not have a PR Wrangler for the holidays. And that was one thing that I did want to bring up here, and I'll most likely raise it up again in Slack, is that next week is the APAC friendly meeting time, but we're also getting into the US holidays, kind of end of year wind down. What are folks' thoughts on either canceling it or still continuing to host it? Because we're, so I'll be honest, I'm a little torn because it is the APAC meeting, so it's not really impacted by the US holidays. However, there's a lot of folks from the US that will be supporting that meeting and maybe aren't available, me being one of those. Any strong feelings one way or the other?
I say you're the boss.
I'm definitely not the boss, but what I'll do is I'll bring it up on Slack and see what the general opinions are. You know, I think that the folks who are vested in this most likely are sleeping right now, and make sure that there's some general awareness from the folks that would actually get value out of that APAC friendly time zoned meeting. Cool. So I'll bring that up on Slack. And as always, approvers, make sure you know your PR Wrangler shift, and there's a link in the agenda there. And I'll throw the agenda in the chat as well for folks who don't have it. And pretty light agenda today. So I know that last week there was a discussion around having the release 120 retro, and be a perfect time to kick that off today. So I'll hand it over to Anna if you want to kick us off and start the discussion, and we can go from there.
Sure. So basically it's open floor to everyone. It's an open discussion. If anyone has thoughts about what went well and what we could improve on, like, I would love to hear it from anyone who has thoughts.
Before opening it up, Anna, do you want to give a brief summary of your opinion on, you know, some general context and the review on the release process, your own opinions on the release process, where we're at today, how things went, and then I think we could open it up just so everyone has context.
Sure. So from my point of view, like, I think the release went really well. Because one of the things that I really wanted to focus on for this release was not getting a lot of PRs piled up before the deadline. And I think we did a really good job this release. If you think back to all the deadlines we had, except the first one, which was the placeholder deadline, the other deadlines, we only had maybe like 5-ish, like we were looking at like a day before the deadline. I mean, there were some that got extended after the deadline, but I think from my perspective, like, I think following the last release process and just making sure that we're more actively participating with SIG Docs on reviews and getting approvals. Like, I think we did a good job there, in my opinion. So, yeah. But then there's also another thing. I actually didn't know that we had to communicate with the communications team from the SIG release. Like, I didn't actually, that was not in the docs rule handbook. And I knew that there was a blog post somewhere in my responsibilities, but then like, I never realized that I had to like, I should reach out to them and then work with them to get the blog post published, because that's one of the things that Lead does. They publish the blog post during the release day. And I wish I have known that sooner. So I did actually update the docs rule handbook to like reach out to the comms team. And I think that's why Joe is here as well. So we can talk a little bit more about how we can better communicate with the comms team and make the blog post process smoother for the next release. But other than those two things, I think it went pretty well. I don't know what people thought about that.
I'll chime in. I was one of the shadows for the docs team, and I just say that I think it went very well as well. And the communication between the docs shadows and docs team itself by Anna was amazing. Like we were always updated with what went on every week and any action items we had for the upcoming week. Having been on previous release teams, but for different sub teams, I thought the communication was great amongst the docs release team. So that's all I had.
I guess I can chime in on from the comms perspective, because I think just like Anna, and maybe I'll first start off for saying Anna, I think Anna, just from an outside being a lead, watching her, she was amazing during this release cycle. I was even able to draft off of like what she was doing as well. So I think, you know, it was great, and I could see it with her team as well, and it was helpful for other groups. But specifically about like the comms and communication, yeah, in our handbook, there's not any mention of this relationship. And I think it wasn't really until the last week when we just got added to like, oh, hey, I knew that Jorge Castro and Bob were the ones that were going to do some approvals, but that there was a whole channel that was available to us to be able to kind of get feedback. Ideally, it would have been great if we could, because we were kind of already building drafts for the release blog as well as feature blogs, and we could have already been submitting for review and getting feedback from SIG Docs, which we got in the last couple of days. And so it was this race to get input. Anna was great in regards to kind of amplifying the need to have that peer review. So I think definitely we're going to add to our, activities on the handbook is just clearly define that, because it was kind of a resource that we definitely needed. I felt like we were, really trying to look back at past work that comms teams have done to try to find answers to like, how do we know this is approved? When should we release this? And I'll share comments that Divya, who was one of my shadows, she said that she thought one of the things we'd have benefit from knowing earlier was a SIG Docs blog bit. Also, if we could get docs to sort of agree upon a cadence on the approval and amendments of the comms release and feature blogs towards the end of every cycle, that'd be great. That'd be good too. And by cadence, I mean a firm set of timelines like we have for doc enhancements, after which the blogs from our side cannot be submitted. Only amended reviews are permitted. And she said, I went through the comms lead notes, and although there are some suggested timelines, I felt the undue pressure from all sides can be reduced if we have a firm timeline in place for this bit. And so I kind of, I think, agree with that. Like, there wasn't really a clear, like we have some loose kind of guidelines about when things should kind of magically appear or be ready, be published, but nothing that kind of leads up towards it. Like, what are the interim steps? So, there is some call outs that the comms lead meets with the enhancements and talks about noteworthy things, talks to release out teams as well. But I did definitely think there could have been some, feedback from the docs teams to help us as well. And I think we're all kind of challenged in the release teams as well of like, how do we even get commitments to, for topics? I mean, that's always been every comms challenge that I've seen over the last 3 cycles. I think we all kind of face that, but it gets really tough. And then we get hammered right the last 2-3 weeks to like produce something magically. So I think that's where I think areas of opportunity, I think going forward is maybe tighter alignment, with release notes, with docs may help ease some of this challenge at the end, as well as like not expect everybody at the last minute to start reviewing feature blogs or release blogs in the last week. I kind of feel like it's probably still going to be a thing, but at least if there's a little bit more communication and upfront about, hey, expect all these things to drop here, we're going to need you to come in after release notes is done. That may even be helpful, but this time around, it just felt like it landed on everybody in that last couple of days.
And I would just love to quickly add a little context on that one piece on blog review. Historically, the blog team has actually kind of taken ourselves out of that review process just because there are so many people on the comms and doc side that, like we trust that the blog's in a pretty good place before it gets to us. We've kind of always just helped review if like the team wants it. I think it would be great to get in, like make a decision one way or the other if we want blog team review or not, just so we can be more involved in the comms process from the beginning. I don't mind either way, just I think you're right that it should be really clear in the process whether we're involved or not.
So I guess just a question there. So if you're not involved, then is it mostly the docs team that reviews it, or like who reviews it if the blog team is not involved?
Historically, it's been a combination of the comms team and then the release leads and enhancement leads. So like an enhancement lead will say, yes, this looks right. The release lead will kind of give their final blessing on it. And then at that point, like, it's gone through enough eyes for us to be comfortable with it.
See.
Yeah, I think this is a great feedback. I'm curious on how we got to this point, and just to give some context, in some of the earlier, I guess, teen releases, so like 13, 14 or so was when I was more involved with the docs release process. I believe there was a transitional period where comms was handled by CNCF directly. There was a little internal CNCF comms team, and I'm looking for Caitlin for confirmation or awareness of this. I want to make sure I'm not telling fibs here. And it transitioned more into a community aspect where there's actually the comms team, comms shadows, and a little more of a, kind of like the traditional open source culture we see in the Kubernetes community, as opposed to direct CNCF involvement for the communication and release process. And so from that transition in the early teens of Kubernetes, and I say early teens as in the early the patch release teens of Kubernetes, all the way now, 8 to 10 releases into 1.20, it seems like things are going good, but maybe that communication or line of communication was broken somewhere. I'm just curious if anyone has any context on how we got here. And if not, it's not the end of the world either.
Yeah, so the comms position itself was originally created by the CNCF team, Natasha and myself, with a really close partnership. I think even beyond like when we were the leads for that role, with the really close partnership with the CNCF PR team. Beyond that, like it's become this really amazing community role, but I think everything you said, Jim, was correct. But I do think we've lost some of that in the iterations of the release handbook, of the role handbook, like what that used to look like.
So do we want to agree on like who should take that responsibility right now, or is that like need more discussion?
Responsibility for the blog, or I guess what in particular?
Yeah, for the blogs. And I think it'd be really good to actually discuss when would be a good time to actually make a PR to get the release blogs like reviewed and stuff like that as well. And have the docs team involved, like SIG Docs involved if needed, and the blog team. And I don't know, I wish like there should be an action item for the comms team and the docs team to make this process better for the next release. And want us to agree on something, I guess.
So just to give some context on the handbook itself, like, so there's kind of starting around like, week 5 is when we kind of start getting like a skeleton framework of like just what the release blog enhancements kind of look like. I found that's not always true because we know how it is. Like I have to look at like on the enhancement spreadsheet, I have to look at like the docs PRs to kind of know like, is this really going to be there, so that I can go bug enhancements people to like start trying to come up with like feature blogs. Really, it didn't really come together until about week 8. And that's when I kind of knew for sure, like, all right, I know we can start writing about these things. Let's start reaching out to enhancer people as well and start seeing who we can get committed to maybe write, specific blogs about specific tips. But then after that, like the handbook only really has like week 10 and 11. There is no mention up until that point. Week 10 is when you publish and finalize a release blog, or you publish a release blog and then you finalize a feature blog. And then week 11 is publish a feature blogs. So it's kind of like everything comes at the last. There's no like call outs about, hey, go out and get feedback, or even like now we know, let's set Bob and Jorge's expectations that we're going to need them to take a look at these things towards the end of the cycle. So we could add some call outs for the pre-steps that are needed to, hey, engage SIG Docs, or or something like that. I don't know if that's what you're thinking, Anna.
Yeah, definitely. I think maybe even joining the SIG Docs meeting during that time, just like to give awareness of like which blog, there's a PR for like these blogs that needs to be reviewed for the release and stuff like that. Or yeah, I guess just more communication between the team, but earlier would like get better reviews and get the process ready so that it can be published on time. I guess that's what I was thinking.
Okay, no, I like that idea.
Yeah, and so I think we can definitely come up with a decision here. This is one of those strange things where there's not really going to be a like key decision maker. It's one of the beautiful things about the open source community is there's not going to be, here's the right way, here's the wrong way, let's go the right way. So I think we have the ability to make the decision if we want. At a very high level, at least from what I'm hearing, it sounds like it'd be beneficial for just some sort of cross collaboration. It sounds like putting it in the handbook would be a good way to establish that, I guess, foundational instruction. And then to echo what Anna was saying, these meetings are wide open. So if someone from comms wants to jump into one of the docs meetings midway through the release and just say, hey, look, I don't really have too much to add to this meeting today, but I'm just trying to open up this communication channel. Here's my challenges. Here's what I need help with. There could be an opportunity there just to introduce yourself and say, hey, and pop into one of the SIG Docs meetings at that halfway point. And I think that the communication goes both ways. I think that the docs handbook could also have the docs release lead or the docs shadows join a comms meeting, or a scheduled session and say, hey, look, we're in progress of doing documentation. How can we help? Here's what we're seeing. Here's what we're, currently doing. I do know for docs in particularly, things are pretty slow in the beginning. So there's really not much to update, or you join in a meeting and you say, well, we don't even know what the enhancements are. We don't know the status of the docs. So this seems like it by nature has to come late in the release, but by no means needs to come a day before the release. And I think that it makes sense for that communication to be open on both ends. But happy to hear if anyone has any other opinions on making it more formal, adding it more to the handbook. Like I said, there's not going to be a right answer here, but I think we're heading in the right direction.
Personally, I believe that getting things done earlier as possible is better. Being on a few teams where you just do everything at the end. So like maybe docs and comms teams could work together earlier on before week 11, like midway through, like Anna says, and yeah, and I know SIG Docs. I know we rely on you a lot. The release team does with all the reviews, getting things merged, and now also with blogs as well. So I prefer, we get everything to SIG Docs as early as possible, and depending on the timeline, of course. So, which is still to be determined for 121.
And then I just want to say, Joseph, I'd love to work with you to update the role handbook. I have some historical documentation that might make sense to go in here, but then you kind of know better how it's gone this time around. So would love to partner with you to update some of that information.
Yeah, sure. No, I think it would be good, and definitely I think I've kind of been onboarding Divya, who's going to be taking over, and so I think between both of us we can kind of do this. And I just jump back to Jim. Hey, I really love the way you kind of put that, because I think if I look back at just this release cycle and just kind of getting, just even having, I think docs and release notes, like we're all kind of in that same thing, like, and we all kind of land 1, 2, 3 at some point. So we all kind of have the same pains in the release cycle at just slightly different margins. But I agree. I think having that, just telegraphing what's happening, I think it's definitely a sympathetic ear, because you understand the challenges with, because we're kind of doing something very similar. So I think those are really great ideas.
Cool. Any other feedback on this topic? It sounds like there's some informal action items moving forward and general consensus as well. And we're recording this meeting too for reference if need be. So I feel comfortable where we're at. Anna, Joseph, Ray, do y'all feel good with where we're at?
Yep, I do. The only one other topic I want to bring up is deprecations and how we handle that, but that's an ongoing subject that's being discussed in GitHub, also with SIG release as well. I don't know if this is a good time to talk about it, or until later on, until once that's all the discussions have been flushed out and on GitHub and SIG release. So
just curious, what in particular about deprecations and handling that is up for discussion?
Just what wanted just a process on how SIG release, how they learn of deprecations. Like the big one for 120 was Docker shim, and who is responsible to which team, or who is responsible to communicate these deprecations and what the timeline is. I think in this morning's call was someone said, like, once it hits the release notes or the change log, it's already kind of late in the game, and it might, goes out on the socials. So yeah, and so there's still a lot of discussions to be had about that. So nothing's been finalized, but just something to bring up for 121. And
Yeah,
there is a big one. What's that? Yeah,
we had 2 of those too as well. Like, because I think because of the Docker shim deprecation kind of like explosion, Monday, that day of, so release blog was just about finished, and then we had the exec probe timeout handling kind of drop, and so they were trying to say, all right, we need to put something in. So we were writing on that Monday one last edit to the release blog so that we could kind of preemptively tackle that deprecation. And going back, I looked through my notes, and I don't know how it missed you. I had that called out. I just didn't ask the question about, like, hey, is there anybody concerned about these deprecations? And so I think definitely one of the things I thought about is just, I think some of us recognized it, but we just weren't planning to, and we even before release notes was coming out, we were calling some of these things out, but for whatever reason, we just didn't really put the dots, everything together to say, hey, maybe we should be preemptively in front of this, so, I don't know how we can work around that or improve that.
yeah, and there's also timeline involved as well. Like, we don't know if it's actually going to be deprecated until well after enhancements freeze, and well after code freeze, or until code freeze. So yeah, I think there's further discussion needed on that.
You have the link to the GitHub issues for that specific discussions, right?
Yeah, I'll post it on the chat when I find it.
Okay, thank you.
Awesome. Yeah, and I agree. And once again, this is going to be ongoing. And, I think that the best effort or not, I shouldn't say the best effort. One of the things that we could do from a SIG Docs perspective is just raising awareness, early on in the cycle, talking about it when we talk about the 121 release. I think there's levels of deprecations and levels of what folks actually think. Not what they think. I'm trying to think of the correct term here, but basically, like, for 116, there was a lot of deprecated API versions that broke a lot of stuff, and a lot of folks stayed on 115 because of that. And I should say it broke stuff. It just forced people to make changes that they weren't necessarily ready to make. With the 120 release in this example, with the Dr. Shim being deprecated, is not being removed just yet. It's going down that process, and it seems to me, at least my bubble of Kubernetes or my ecosystem or social sphere, it seemed like the Dr. Shim being deprecated blew up a lot more than the 116 deprecations, at least from a negative social kind of a social explosion of feedback. And in my opinion, I think that the 116 changes were greater. I think that change was more impactful than this current one. And so dictating what's important and what's not important is also going to be a challenge going forward as well.
It's that I think it was also how to put this nicely.
You're on record.
Yeah, I'm aware. I think there's also an issue around kind of educating people in general about release etiquette. We are open source. You can technically just go and look at the release notes in progress, but in general, leaving announcements to the time of actual release rather than jumping the gun and tweeting about it is usually a better option. And what I really think is maybe the core things surrounding all of this, and is maybe better left for the discussion and the issue, is we don't actually have a great way of announcing deprecations of any kind right now, whether large or small. And it's Kubernetes is at the critical mass of use at this point where deprecations are going to affect a lot of people. And people may not necessarily have the ability or desire to upgrade their nodes to the latest version right at every new release. Like they have reasons for staying on old versions, even if they're not great. And we kind of just need to mature and start communicating those things correctly, because the outrage is a strong word. People are going to feel negatively about deprecations no matter what you do, because there is somebody who is using every little thing. However, we do need to deprecate things as a product organization of some sorts. So it's really just about communicating that in a slightly more responsible way. I don't think this needs to have a ton of overhead. It's really just a series of blog posts, 2 or 3 of them on the same deprecation announcement, so that when people say, you didn't tell me, you can say, well, we told you 3 times. So anyways, that's all I'll say on that.
I have just, Tim, do you want to go?
You're the release lead.
Well, I just have like one more topic that I wanted to bring up, but did you have a comment on what's the last slide, Tim? Or
No, it's general.
okay, then I'll go first. So it's actually an idea that Ray brought up, and I just want to mention it here too, because it's going to be discussed during the 1.20 release retro as well. But I just want to get your opinion on moving the placeholder deadline to match the code freeze deadline. Because right now for this release specifically, we had the placeholder deadline a week before the code freeze. And there was a lot of problems of getting everyone to create a placeholder, because I remember like a day before we had like maybe 15 or something, and the leads had to like all reach out to different SIGs, and then like we did make the deadline. But I think it would be really beneficial to actually have it match the code freeze. So this is something that we wrote down in the retro item, and I was just wondering what SIG Docs thought about that idea as well.
Bravo. It's easier to communicate, where it's like you got to have your stuff done or in a state where it could theoretically be done on exactly one day, right? It's one less thing for people to remember. 100% agree.
That seems very reasonable. I mean, what is the next deadline after the placeholder, and how long is the gap there after code freeze? So if we move that forward a week, the next one is the draft?
Yes. it's like you have to, no, so after the placeholder, it's like you have to have your docs ready for review. And that comes, I actually have to look it up, but I think it was like 2 weeks or 3 weeks after.
Gotcha. Yeah, and it's not a big deal. My personal opinion on this is the release lead can help dictate the timeline. They're running the show. If it makes their life easier by any means, 100% has the backing of at least my support there. And my only thought was, are we squishing the time in between two other deadlines if we were to move that one forward? And it doesn't sound like, losing that 1 week. I think the folks who are cramming to put in their placeholder PR are also going to be the ones cramming to, get that ready to review draft as well. So strong +1 to whatever makes the release leads life a little easier. Open to any other comments or concerns there.
So one of the things that I like about having the placeholder PRs come in a bit earlier is that it spreads out the review effort over a longer period, as some people get in their documentation in earlier, some people are later. What's bad for SIG Docs is if all of the stuff becomes ready for a review over, say, 4 days, and it's fairly close on release, because it's a contended resource. And there's also been a thing, I think, which is kind of tacit, not really stated, which is that for me, placeholder PRs have been a chance, sort of my first sight of what's likely to end up in the release and what things might need calling out. Like informally, oh, you need to mention this in the feature gates table. Informally, you need to communicate this somehow. Don't forget to do that. And I'll have often put in some comments saying, thanks for the placeholder. Here are some things that, I know it's a draft. This isn't a review of your work. This is just some reminders. And I hope those have been useful. So having the drafts come in later means that it's less easy for SIG Docs to provide that early feedback on and guide what we'll need documenting. I am totally +1 to letting the release lead, choose what works, but that is something to bear in mind when choosing.
I think it's a good point. I think from my perspective on that suggestion, it was because we had people still writing code and didn't know if their enhancement or feature is going to make it to the release. So they weren't responsive to our touches to get them to create a placeholder doc.
I have one more suggestion on that then. See what you think of this, especially Ray and Anna. I reckon if you're too busy to create a placeholder or you're not keen, like for me, it's a bit of a signal. Like, I don't think features are ready to graduate if people haven't got time to open a 4-line PR.
He ain't wrong.
Good point.
Because it's I guess it's a sign. Are you going to have time to do the proper documentation?
I almost wonder if we could have the best of both worlds, ever cake and eat it too. If we can move the placeholder deadline, making the general assumption that maybe the folks that are cutting it really close to that deadline might have a other slew of issues with it, but potentially from a release leads or the docs release leads perspective, maybe there could be additional communication going out saying like, yeah, the placeholder deadline is code freeze, but like the sooner you get it in, the sooner we can review it. And I don't know how you can promote that. I've been in the same boat, or I've worn those shoes where you're commenting on GitHub saying like, is there any updates? You're finding people in Slack and you're not getting movement there. And I truly believe that the folks that are going to be on top of this and creating documentation early don't need those comms. And then the folks that you're going to communicate to saying that, hey, earlier the better, it's great, they're still going to wait most likely till the deadline. But in my magical dream world, I see that communication piece being beneficial and then still moving that deadline. So you have that review if needed for the folks who are on top of it. But I don't know if that would actually work or not. We could see.
I also have some, if people want to talk more about the deadline move, we can. I had some general feedback on the release, my notes.
I think, yeah, we can continue the moving the deadline maybe during the Thursday as well and get their feedback as well. And then we can like come together again maybe and just discuss it one more time before we make any decisions.
So my overall feedback is I've been sort of watching SIG Docs for 3-4 releases now. This one went the smoothest I've seen. So good work, Anna. Good work, Anna's team. Good work, all the SIGs, because like what I'm seeing is that there's SIGs that take responsibility for an area of functionality, you know, like SIG auth or SIG node. And then there's sort of cross-cutting SIGs like SIG security, I guess you'd say there. And this is good. And then there's sort of enabling SIGs. SIG release is an enabling SIG, SIG contributor experience, SIG docs. And it felt like, you know, SIGs were coming together to enable those sort of, I don't know, feature teams or whatever you want to call them to deliver the thing. Like our job is to help those other teams, you know, deliver, test. Like I want to test my feature. I want to get my feature accepted. I want to communicate about my feature so the world knows about it. I want to document it so that it's sustainably explained to users for the long term. I felt we did actually a good job overall of being an enabling SIG.
I have one question for you, Anna, which is I know you were concerned slightly before KubeCon about the fact that the docs deadline was like directly after KubeCon. Is there anything we could have done differently? Did that go well in the end, first off? And secondly, is there any way we could have organized better support for you in that regards?
So I made it sound very scary because I thought we were gonna like end up in a very like
scared, yeah. Yeah, and I remember checking in because I was on vacation the week after KubeCon. I was like, Anna, there's like 2 PRs left.
I know.
Fine.
Yeah, but I think because I mentioned that like a way beforehand, like for SIG Docs to keep eyes on the reviews and stuff. I think like generally like our communication with the docs team and the SIG Docs like made it all possible. Like I don't know about you guys, but there was a lot of PRs open by the deadline, and the deadline did get moved. I don't know if you remember, for like a few days, like 3 days, I believe. And even without that, I think we would have been a good place regardless. And I think it was all because of the communications that we have, you know, done in the SIG Docs meeting and just like in Slack and stuff like that. So, I mean, it was all mostly because you guys were all on top of reviewing and approving, and I think that's why it was still successful regardless of like Thanksgiving and KubeCon and all the events that happened in November.
Cool, yeah, definitely. And you know, I do want to add as well from my perspective, you know, I thought that each subsequent release has been better and better after the last. And when I joined the release team, I want to say it was like 111 or 112. I set out with the main goal of building the SIG Docs handbook, because when I joined the release team, the handbook was very high level. It was like, all right, you open this branch, you do this PR, and I don't want to use the word technically challenged. I feel like I love technology, but I'm definitely not like a GitHub guru. I'm definitely not up on all of the open source processes and things like that at the time that I joined, where I didn't feel like I was properly given the instructions or the tool set needed to perform a release cycle. So I wanted to, and I want to say like dumb down the handbook for myself, but not really dumb it down. I wanted to over explain the details in the handbook. And as a result, we had this handbook that was this monstrous document of all these little nooks and crannies of things that happens during the release cycle. And it really benefited me. But what I like to see, and what I've seen over the past couple of releases, is that information has been consolidated. It's been improved. It's been modified to match the needs as the release changes, as the teams change. And I can't begin to explain how happy I am to see the amount of frequent PRs to the handbook. It was a dead and dying document when I looked at it a few years back, and I think as a valuable asset. And the amount of effort, whether it's large or little, on the handbook benefits, like it's like compounding benefit for the next and future release leads. So I was really thrilled to see that continuation. And then to echo what the comments that have already been made is to see the additional communications. And I think that release channel for SIG Docs release was new this cycle in 1.20. And that was incredible to see the amount of communication, the daily updates, the statuses. I feel like I was just scrolling through Slack and I was able to see the current status of the docs team. It wasn't in a private messaging channel how it was done historically. It was all done out in the open. I think that channel was huge from a communication and openness standpoint that really helped the release out. So the TLDR is, I thought the release went awesome. Anna, you did an awesome job. I'm really excited, especially about the handbook, because of the compounding value it adds to the docs release process. And I look forward to the 121 release. Cool. Any other questions or comments on the 120 release or the 120 upcoming release? All right, here, nothing. I know we got about 5 minutes left. We definitely spent a ton of time on that topic, but I think the conversation is very valuable for me and the SIG Docs organization, definitely. So moving on for the blog update, is there anyone on the call who wants to give us an update there?
I guess that's probably me. Really nothing that new and exciting, other than, we need to do, I think, some more kind of awareness and visibility building around the blog process again. We kind of go through this every couple quarters or so, I would say. So we're going to be meeting on Thursday to talk a little bit about that. And then, as usual, we are always looking for new reviewers for blog posts as well. We've made it pretty easy for people to get involved, and showing up to that blog review meeting on Thursdays is really the best way to get kicked off. But the idea is that you would kind of review as a standard GitHub member, go through a few cycles, see if it's something you're interested in, get a feel for the process, and then you would essentially move to kind of a formal approver with permissions and all of that after a few cycles of that. So like I said, if anyone's interested, show up on Thursday or just ping me on Slack. I know we have a couple people interested, so we'll probably be doing a couple onboarding sessions coming up.
Awesome, sounds good. And then would you mind throwing the team meeting link or something similar for folks who are interested in the agenda there?
Yeah, and I think I got it up on the SIG Docs official calendar as well, so everyone should be able to see it there too.
Awesome. Cool, thanks, Caitlin.
Yeah, I just checked, it's up there.
Sweet.
Awesome. Cool, moving on. Celeste, you have some issues and PRs you'd like to talk about.
I'm wondering if it's actually better to push these to next week, just because they are a slightly involved conversation. But I will give you a preview, and then everybody can just take a whole luxurious week to look through these. The TLDR is the two PRs listed in the agenda under my name are around updating the guestbook tutorial on the website. So that involves updating the example as well as updating the text. They were opened in the name of working group naming on behalf of, thank you, Anna. Oh no, you're something else. Anyways, they were opened on behalf of kind of working group naming to remove some problematic language that did exist in those examples. And from a naming perspective, we are comfortable with the change. However, the implementer decided to make these changes by wholesale replacing Mongo database in the example with Redis, which is a very, very large change. We are changing from a database to something which is not quite a database. Now, for the positive, the example still works. From a Kubernetes perspective, we are still teaching people the basics of working with Kubernetes in a particular way. However, at this point, we need SIG Docs to kind of jump in on that and provide a bit of review as to whether we're okay with a change on the magnitude that was made. So that's kind of thing number one. Thing number two, it is very likely that this particular committer, Pulsar, will be too busy to actually push these PRs over the line. So we may need to take over the PR on their behalf, at the very least the website PR, and then we might be able to draft Stephen Augustus in to push the examples PR over the line as well. So I'm raising awareness. Please take a look. I will drop the links in the SIG Docs channel as well, so we can take this discussion offline. TLDR, it's a bit of a doozy.
Awesome. Thanks for that, Celeste. Yeah, and I think this would be a little bit of a wider discussion, better suited for next week or the week after that. And I thought about that when we were shifting over to your agenda item, but I was like, I feel like Celeste's action item, for whatever reason it is, had to get pushed for a few weeks, I don't know, however many weeks ago. I don't know what it is, it's just timing, I guess.
Yeah, it's just, what, it's the end of the year.
Yeah.
It's the end of the year. There was a KubeCon, there was a release, and now we're just sort of rolling into Christmas. Yeah.
Yeah, no, definitely. Time is flying. There's a whole lot of marches in 2020. Cool. So we're out of time, unfortunately. So there's not room to continue on the agenda. I will end up moving some things around and opening up the next meeting's agenda too, if we wanted to add additional topics there. As always, be great to each other. And that's a SIG Docs meeting. Okay. Talk to y'all later.